A killer hides behind sugar and sweetness, but Nero Wolfe smells something bitter beneath the frosting. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. This community keeps getting better. Comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Your comments mean the world to me. I always love reading them. Let's begin. It was a Tuesday, which meant Fritz was experimenting with another variation of his sponge cake, and Nero Wolfe was buried in fox orchids of the Andes, ignoring both the doorbell and humanity in general. I had just settled into my desk with the day's mail when the phone rang. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I made the mistake of glancing at the caller ID. Archie Goodwin speaking, I said, aiming for chipper and landing somewhere around civil. The voice that answered was a woman's, tight, low-pitched, and under considerable strain. Mr. Goodwin, I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe, immediately. Miss, that's a line I hear more often than my own name. Mr. Wolfe isn't currently taking calls unless they're from the governor, and even then, only if they bring truffles. There was a pause. Then tell him it's about a cake someone died over. That got my attention. Died as in allergic reaction, or died as in dead, she said. And I believe it was meant for me. That was enough for me to stand up. Who are you? Clara Venner. Of Venner's Confectionery. I can be there in 30 minutes. I buzzed the kitchen. Fritz answered, which meant Wolfe hadn't yet driven him from the sanctuary of his flour canisters. Fritz, tell His Majesty we have a visitor en route. A woman. Urgent. Life and death. Involving cake. Fritz didn't need more. Wolfe despises surprises, except for the ones he can control, and anything that infringes on the sanctity of his food rituals gets passed through with all the reverence of a papal decree. 28 minutes later, Clara Venner arrived. Now, I don't fall for every set of red lips and flared nostrils that shows up at the door, but I give credit where it's due. She had poise like she'd been sculpted from chilled buttercream. Mid-30s, hair like glossy espresso, clothes that said, I own a business, and eyes that said, I don't sleep much. I brought her into the office where Wolfe, grudgingly vertical, was lowering himself into the big chair behind his desk. He hadn't shaved that morning, not because he forgot, but because he'd been in one of his twice-monthly moods about the decline of civilization. Shaving, apparently, was complicit. Miss Venner, I said, this is Mr. Nero Wolfe. He's listening. For now. She sat slowly, carefully. Mr. Wolfe, I'm not used to asking for help, and certainly not like this. Wolfe lifted one brow, just slightly. So few people are. She pressed her fingers together. I own Venner's Confectionery on Lexington. We specialize in high-end custom desserts, celebration cakes, wedding pieces, that sort of thing. A week ago, we delivered a birthday cake to an address in Turtle Bay. It was meant for a man named Austin Trevis. He was turning 42. Before the candles were even lit, he collapsed and died. Wolfe's fingers curled over the armrests. What was the cause? Cyanide. In the frosting. That made Wolfe grunt. It wasn't approval, it was interest, which was rarer. I didn't know the man, Clara said. The order came through our website, paid in full. My name wasn't attached to it in any way, just the bakery's, but the police traced the cake back to us, and now I'm getting anonymous calls. One of them said, that slice was meant for you. I asked, did you go to the police with that? She shook her head. Not yet. If I do, I'll be shut down for weeks. I have clients lined up through Christmas, and I'm barely holding on after the last 2 years. I need to know if this is personal, and I heard, Mr. Wolfe doesn't miss things. Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Venner, do you have enemies? No more than anyone with a business license and a reputation. But someone must have known I'd be the one to supervise that cake. I wasn't, though. I had a supplier meeting that day, and one of my assistants prepped the frosting. I never touched it. Wolfe opened his eyes. Assistants, too. Penny Lerner and Dominique Zhao. Both excellent. Both have been with me over a year. I asked, any connections to the deceased? Not that I know of, but I wasn't in the room when the order was accepted. It's possible someone knew exactly when I'd be out. Wolfe leaned back and steepled his fingers. You are not here because you fear the law. You are here because you suspect a deliberate attempt on your life, and that fear exceeds your concern for your livelihood. Her eyes narrowed. Yes. Very well, Mr. Goodwin will come to your bakery tomorrow morning. He will speak to your staff, see your space and assess. If I find the matter lacks substance, I will disengage. Clara nodded. That's all I ask. She stood. So did I, partly from habit, and partly because I needed to show Wolfe I hadn't gone soft. She left her card on Wolfe's desk, gold-trimmed, with embossed cocoa-colored lettering. Classy. When she was gone, I turned to Wolfe. What was it? He tilted his head without looking at me. The moment she sat down, she glanced at the orchid behind you, then the decanter, then your tie. Not my face, not my desk, not the chair. She's observant. She's been here before. That threw me. As a client, no. She's hiding something. Wolfe's voice was mild. Perhaps she killed no one, but she is not telling us everything, and that interests me. You will go in the morning. I nodded. And if someone offers me a free slice? He didn't blink. Refuse. You are intolerable enough without being poisoned. That was our warm send-off into the case. Cake, cyanide, and the whisper of deception so faint it could have come from a whisk. The next morning, I headed for Lexington wearing a necktie that Fritz had once claimed made me look like a disrespectful anchovy. Wolfe hadn't commented, which meant he was either preoccupied or saving his barbs for later. I arrived at Venner's confectionery a few minutes before 10, beating the foot traffic and the muffin mobs. The place was slick, white marble counters, glass displays polished to the point of vanity, and a ceiling painted pale pink with gold leaf piping that looked like icing itself. You could smell ambition baked into every square inch, along with Madagascar vanilla, cinnamon, and the faint trace of acetone from a recent floor polish. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you had to whisper your order. Not my scene, but I respected the effort. Behind the counter stood two women. One was tall and angular with cropped hair the color of copper pennies. Penny learner, no doubt. The other was shorter, with a calm precision to her hands as she lined up petite fours on a silver tray. Dominique Zhao, I presumed. I introduced myself and handed over my card, the one that says I work for Nero Wolfe, which usually gets a reaction. This time it got a pause, a look and a stiff kind of courtesy. Clara Venner emerged from a door marked private, staff only, wearing a navy smock with her logo stitched in sugar pink thread. Mr. Goodwin, she said, and I appreciated that she didn't try to do the double-cheek European thing. Come on back. Her office was a minimalist cube, all white walls and clean shelves. It made Wolfe's place look like a Victorian fever dream. There were photos, cakes towering with sugared orchids, others cut with impossible geometry. In one, Clara stood beside a three-tiered monstrosity shaped like a Fabergé egg, her face unsmiling, arms folded like a general posing with artillery. I've told Penny and Dominique you'll be asking questions, she said, seating herself behind her desk like she intended to stay put. They're loyal, but they're not saints. Ask what you like. Thanks. I leaned against the edge of the desk. Let's start with the cake itself. Who handled it? Dominique did the batter. Penny mixed the frosting. I did the final inspection and piping, except that day, I didn't. Because of the supplier meeting. Yes. Did anyone else have access to the frosting after it was made? Technically yes, she said. The tubs are labeled and stored in our walk-in fridge. But during business hours, the kitchen's always in motion. We trust each other not to tamper with prep. Trust's nice, I said. But it doesn't hold up great against cyanide. She didn't flinch. No, it doesn't. I asked about the customer, Austin Trevis, and the ordering process. She pulled up the invoice on her tablet and handed it to me. The order had come in through their online portal, paid with a business credit card registered to Trevis. Standard form, nothing odd. The delivery had been scheduled for 2 p.m. and handed off to a third-party courier. You didn't interact with Trevis directly? No, never even heard of him before this. I nodded. Okay, let me talk to your staff. Penny Lerner was up first. In the kitchen she stood with her arms crossed and a defensive tilt to her chin. I didn't kill anybody, and I don't like being treated like I might have. Then we're in agreement. I don't like treating people like suspects unless they make it easy. She scowled. Look, I made the frosting, sure. Basic buttercream, stabilized with gelatin. That batch was fine. No weird smell, no weird color. Clara does the final check on everything. Except that day, she told me. I figured it was a one-off, happens sometimes. Did anyone go near your station while you were working? Not that I noticed, she said. But like I said, it's a busy space. The fridge is always getting opened. Dominique could have walked past. So could Clara, though she says she didn't. Any drama between you and Dominique? She exhaled through her nose. We work together. That's enough friction some days. Be honest, do you think someone here could have done it? She hesitated. I think people get desperate, or scared, or angry. And I think Clara's got a few shadows she doesn't like admitting. I asked what she meant, but she just shook her head. Dominique Zhao, on the other hand, didn't dodge. When I found her in the decorating room applying sugared violets to a cake with surgical focus, she offered a firm handshake and a calm demeanor that made you wonder if she ever broke a sweat. I know why you're here, she said. And no, I didn't poison the cake. That's becoming a popular refrain. I told her, I'm sure it is. But I didn't even know the client's name until the police came by. I just follow the prep list. Did you notice anything strange about the frosting batch that day? She shook her head. It was Penny's batch. Looked normal. Anyone else come in after she made it? Probably. Clara popped in and out. So did the delivery guy. He likes to loiter by the fridge because it's cool in there. That was new. You remember his name? Nick. Works for Bright Drop Couriers. Tall, loud, bad cologne. I jotted it down. Do you think the cake was meant for Clara? She stopped mid-piping. I don't know, but Clara's had people angry with her before. She runs this place like a military camp. Clients, staff, it wears on people. Maybe someone snapped. It was a fair theory. I thanked her, gave her my card, and asked her to call if anything new came to mind. Back in the office, I passed Clara on my way out. I'll report to Wolfe, I said. In the meantime, no more surprise frosting deliveries, huh? She almost smiled. I'll do my best. On the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and dialed the brownstone. Report, Wolfe said when he picked up. He was eating something. I could hear the faint clink of silverware and satisfaction. Standard setup. Dominique did the cake. Penny did the frosting. Clara was out. Everyone had a reason to be near the prep area. Everyone insists they didn't do it. Nobody has a motive we can prove. Wolfe grunted. And yet Miss Venner believes it was personal. Yeah, and she might be right. I dislike ambiguity, Archie. Me too. But the frosting didn't walk into that cake by itself. There was a pause. Return. Bring the invoice, and a sample of the employee schedule for the day of the poisoning. I want to know who had the opportunity, and who thought they had the control. I hung up and turned back toward the shop. Something told me this case wasn't about the cake. It was about what got baked in behind it. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had retreated to the plant rooms. I handed Fritz the employee schedule and the invoice from Venner's, and he passed them to Wolfe through the door without ceremony. Fritz didn't like crossing that threshold any more than Wolfe liked having it crossed. I waited in the office, flipping through the latest gourmet, and listening for the telltale sound of Wolfe's chair creaking back into place. 20 minutes later, he emerged. He was wearing his second-best mustard-colored vest, and a look that suggested he'd already eliminated someone in his head. Well? I asked, as he sank into his throne and arranged the papers like they were court evidence. There are inconsistencies, he said, but not yet contradictions. Start with what we know. Very well, he tapped the schedule. On the day in question, Wednesday, Miss Yeo arrived at 8, Miss Lerner at 8:30. Miss Venner departed at 10:45 for a meeting scheduled at Levin Foods, a wholesale flavoring supplier. She returned at 2:15. after the cake had already been picked up. Cake prep started when 9 o'clock. Frosting was completed by 10:15. The delivery courier, Nick, retrieved the order at 1:50. That gives us a window of 3.5 hours, during which the cake sat in cold storage. Correct. Accessible by all staff, and potentially, the courier. I nodded. So either the poison went in before it hit the fridge, or someone tampered with it during that long lull. Wolfe closed his eyes. This courier, Nick, you said he loiters. Dominique mentioned it. Likes the cold air. If he had access, he could have introduced the poison. But then we must ask why. And for whom? I'll dig into him. Wolfe inclined his head slightly, the closest he gets to approval before dinner. Do so. But not before contacting Saul. I want every name associated with Venner's confectionery. Former employees, current clients, anyone who might wish her harm. You're going full throttle. I do not enjoy poison, Archie. It is cowardly. It stains a fine method of food preparation, and it was executed carelessly, without elegance. It offends me. That was Wolfe's version of moral outrage. I made the calls. Saul Panzer was already in motion, his voice clipped but confident. He said he'd report back by evening. Meanwhile, I tracked down the courier service, Bright Drop, and asked for their driver schedule for the day of the Trevis delivery. It took 2 phone calls, some implied legal heat, and a name drop of Wolfe's, but I got a hold of the dispatcher, a woman named Rhonda, who confirmed that yes, Nick Parson had done the pickup. I asked if I could talk to him. She hesitated. He's on his route. Midtown. Want me to text him your number? No. Give me his current drop. I'll catch him there. 10 minutes later, I was stepping into the fluorescent belly of an office building mailroom on 47th. Nick Parson was easy to spot. 6'2", looked like he wrestled crates for fun, and had a voice like a car muffler in need of tightening. Yeah, I remember that cake, he said. Pink box, heavy as hell. Thought it was a marble block at first. You make a habit of hanging around client kitchens. He laughed, then caught my tone and dialed it back. Hey, I'm not sniffing cupcakes. It's hot out there. That fridge is like heaven. Sometimes I hover a minute. Did you open the box? Hell no. Not my job. Did anyone else go near it while you were there? He thought. Not that I saw. Penny waved me through. Dominique said hi. Clara was out. That tracked. I asked him if he knew the name Austin Trevis. Should I? Only if you poisoned him. He looked up fast. Whoa. What? Never mind. You didn't. Back at the brownstone, I reported in. Wolfe was already at the table, napkin folded with the precision of a contract. He waved me into my chair. You believe the courier didn't tamper? He doesn't strike me as the calculating type. Bah. You have a fondness for brawn. I have a nose for liars. He's not it. Wolfe nodded and speared an asparagus spear with surgical irritation. Then we returned to the kitchen. Either Dominique or Penny introduced the cyanide. The question is for whom? We didn't get to stew on it long. At 8:45, the doorbell rang. I opened it and found Clara Venner again. But this time she wasn't buttercream cool. Her hands were clenched. Her face looked like it had been scrubbed too hard, and she didn't wait to be invited in. I got a note, she said, thrusting an envelope into my hands. No return address. Slipped under my office door sometime after closing. I opened it, one typed line on plain white paper. Next time, I won't miss. Wolfe had come to the office door. Where was this found? Under the door, after I left for 20 minutes to get coffee. I was the only one left in the building. Wolfe took the note with 2 fingers like it was a dead insect. No envelope. No. Typewritten. Yes. And not from our printer. I checked. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. This is no longer idle menace. This is provocation. He meant it was time to dig deeper, and faster. I said, I'll follow up with Saul. We need to know who's got a reason to scare her, or kill her. Indeed, Wolfe said. Miss Venner, you may stay here for the night if you wish. She blinked. Here. This house is secured. Fritz is discreet. And Archie sleeps with one eye open. You may remain until I determine whether your presence is essential to the killer's anxiety, or merely his performance. She hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the city went on as usual. Inside the brownstone, the air had thickened. Not from fear, but from the scent Wolfe thrives on most: pressure. Clara Venner stayed the night in the upstairs guest room, the one Wolfe calls the pink oubliette, because it's rarely used and mostly forgotten. Unless the guest is female, the situation precarious, and Fritz is in a charitable mood. He brought her tea and a lavender pillow sachet. I brought her nothing but a promise. If someone so much as rattled the gate, I'd be at the window with my .32 in hand and a bad attitude. Morning came without gunfire, but not without drama. At 7:50 sharp, Saul Panzer called. That alone meant he had something. Saul doesn't waste phone minutes on pleasantries. Wolfe was already in his chair with his globe of beer cheese eggs when I patched Saul through to the speakerphone. I've got a list of 3 people with a grudge against Clara Venner big enough to toast, Saul said. You want 'em in ascending or descending order of probable felony. Wolfe, dabbing his lips with a napkin, murmured, as they occur to you. Right. First's Carol Brighton. Used to run a rival bakery, 4 blocks down. Lost her lease last year. According to a guy I talked to, Carol blamed Clara for spreading rumors about health violations. No proof, just poison in the air. Delightful, Wolfe said. Second's a former assistant, Alton Peary. Worked for Clara 2 years ago. Fired after some dough went missing. Clara didn't press charges, but word got around, and Peary couldn't land another gig in Manhattan kitchens. He's now freelancing from Queens and, according to one source, not over it. Understandable, Wolfe muttered. If misdirected, last one's a client. Name's Audrey Trevis. That got my attention. As in, wife of the deceased. Widow, I should say. They had ordered cakes from Clara before wedding anniversary. Office promotions. I dug into the delivery records. The birthday cake wasn't Audrey's first Venner purchase. What she got against Clara? She and Clara had a falling out 6 months ago over a custom cake that was delivered late. Audrey apparently threw a fit in front of other customers and claimed Clara ruined everything. I don't know if that everything included a marriage, but according to the delivery boy, Audrey's been sour ever since. That's our frosting, I said. Wolfe gave a slight nod. His eyes narrowed in thought. 3 possibilities, all emotional, all capable of turning anger into action. Which one's our type? I asked. Whichever one understands performance, Wolfe said. This crime was meant to be seen, not merely done. I thanked Saul and hung up. Wolfe swiveled to face me. Miss Venner will remain here today. You will visit these 3 beginning with Miss Brighton, then Mr. Peary, save Mrs. Trevis for last. Speak with each, observe, and return before 6. Want me to pick up strudel on the way back? Wolfe's gaze could have curdled cream. I grabbed my coat and headed for the Upper East Side. Carol Brighton was easy to find. She had set up a new operation in a shared kitchen space near First Avenue. When I arrived, she was elbow deep in cinnamon glaze, but didn't hesitate to stop and wipe her hands when I introduced myself. Clara Venner sent you, didn't she? She asked. Her voice was husky. Too many late nights with bourbon or grudges. Indirectly, I said. We're looking into what happened with the Trevis cake. She snorted. Figures. Only Clara could turn a man's death into a marketing catastrophe. I bet she's playing the victim. You don't sound like a fan. I'm not. She cut my throat in business, figuratively. But if I wanted her out, I wouldn't have to kill anyone. I'd just let her reputation implode. And believe me, it's cracking. Because of the poisoning. Because Clara's not as clean as she looks. She's got secrets stacked like tarts. She's careful, but not invincible. Like what kind of secrets? She smiled without mirth. Ask Alton Peary. So I did. Peary lived in a walk-up in Astoria. His place smelled like burnt sugar and regret. He opened the door shirtless, then threw on a tattered robe when I flashed my credentials. I didn't kill nobody, he said, before I could open my notebook. You're here about the cake, right? I nodded. You worked for Clara Venner. 2 years. She canned me over a few missing dollars from the register. Claimed I stole. I didn't. Got any reason to get even? Plenty. But not like that. I'd rather watch her crash slowly. You know anyone else who might want her out of the picture? He hesitated. She had a thing. A side thing. Some guy who came around after hours. That got my attention. What guy? Didn't catch a name. Older, well-dressed, smelled like cloves. I only saw him twice. Clara got real cagey about him. Told me to mind my own, or I'd be out on the street, which he was now. By then it was 4:30. I headed west to Audrey Trevis's address. She lived in a co-op near Sutton Place, with a view that probably cost more than Wolfe's annual beer budget. She answered the door in black, her eyes dry but her tone clipped. I already spoke to the police. I'm not the police. I'm here on behalf of Nero Wolfe. I see. Come in, but I have only 10 minutes. Her living room was an art gallery in disguise, minimalist furniture, oversized abstract paintings, and a faint scent of lilies. She sat with a posture that could have cut granite. You knew Clara Venner? Yes. She made the best cakes in the city. I'm not ashamed to say I liked beautiful things. What happened 6 months ago? Her lips thinned. She delivered a cake an hour late to an event where timing was everything. It embarrassed me. That's all. Did you stay in contact? No. After that I used another bakery. So you didn't order the birthday cake? I did not. Did your husband? She hesitated. I don't know. He didn't tell me. I let silence stretch, just long enough. Finally she said, he and Clara had their own friendship. I never asked how far it went. Do you think the cake was meant for him? She looked at me, then looked away. No, I think it was meant for her. That night, back in the brownstone, I relayed it all to Wolfe. He absorbed each detail like gravy into bread. He said nothing for nearly a minute. Then someone intended to punish Clara Venner, but someone else used the same act to make it look like collateral damage. The question is, who piggybacked on whom? I blinked. You think 2 people are involved? No, I think one person played both roles. He steepled his fingers and closed his eyes. And that, Archie, is where they made their mistake. The next morning started off the same as most in the brownstone. Fritz frying something sacred in butter. Wolfe upstairs with his orchids pretending the outside world didn't exist. And me at my desk, sorting through the day's reminders, and hoping none of them involved poison, pastry, or emotional outbursts. Naturally, I was out of luck. At precisely 9:12 a.m., Fritz came into the office, not hurried, but with that tense set of his mouth that meant something had cracked the brownstone's perimeter. She is back, he said, Miss Venner, and she is upset. Clara stood in the hallway, looking like she'd come through a storm, hair windblown, scarf knotted badly, and face pale enough to match the marble floor. I didn't even have to ask. She held out her phone with a shaking hand. I took it. The screen displayed a photo message, anonymous number, no text. The image was of her bakery counter, taken through the front glass. At night. This was sent to me 10 minutes ago, she said. Whoever it is, they're watching the store. I escorted her to the office, where Wolfe had just lowered himself into his chair like a judge preparing for sentencing. She was followed, I told him, or someone wants her to think she was. Clara sat stiffly, clenching her fists. I didn't sign up for this level of psychological warfare. No one does, Wolfe murmured, except perhaps playwrights. I handed him the phone. He peered at the image briefly, then set it down on his desk like it smelled funny. We are no longer merely solving a crime, Miss Venner. We are dismantling a campaign. Her voice was low. I can't go back there if someone's waiting outside for me. You won't, Wolfe said. Not until this is resolved. And that time is near. He turned to me. Archie, call Saul. I want every delivery order placed at Venner's in the last 3 months. Names, addresses, payment methods. I want to know who's connected to Austin Trevis, Audrey Trevis, or Clara herself, particularly any that overlap. On it. He turned back to Clara. Now, tell me what you haven't yet told me. This is your last opportunity to be the one holding the truth instead of buried beneath it. Her jaw tightened. Then slowly, she exhaled. Austin Trevis and I, we had an affair. It lasted 7 months, ended 4 months ago. Why did it end? I broke it off. He was starting to make demands, wanted me to leave the bakery and start something with him. But he was erratic, possessive. I didn't trust it. Did his wife know?
I don't think so. She never confronted me. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, yet she knew enough to be bitter, and enough to say the cake wasn't meant for him. Clara's brow furrowed. You think Audrey sent that cake? I think Audrey sent a message. Whether she meant to kill or frighten is still unclear, but it was no ordinary purchase. Saul called back an hour later. Wolfe was halfway through his second beer, and halfway through eviscerating a newspaper columnist for misquoting Epictetus. Saul's voice came through the speaker, dry and efficient. We've got something. I'm listening, Wolfe said. Of the cake orders placed in the last 3 months, there are 6 that trace back to shell accounts or prepaid gift cards. One stands out. A week before Austin Trevis's death, an order was placed from a library kiosk in Tribeca, paid with an anonymous reloadable debit card. The recipient, Austin Trevis, ordered under the bakery's standard account. No sender listed. No sender listed. No.
Who picked it up? It was for delivery. Paid in full, including tip for the driver. Trace the card, I asked. Working on it. But get this, the surveillance footage from the library kiosk, don't ask how I got it, shows a woman at the terminal. 5'8", dark hair, oversized coat. Can't see her face clearly, but, he paused. But, I showed it to one of the Venner's delivery guys. He says it might be Dominique Zhao. Wolfe didn't move, he didn't even blink. But I've seen him enough to recognize the tiny shift in his breathing. The way the wheels started grinding when the final gear clicked into place. Dominique Zhao, he said quietly. The calm one. The one who played everything just close enough to the vest. Did she and Clara have conflict? Nothing public, I said. But Penny hinted at some friction. Of course she did, Wolfe said. She noticed what Miss Venner did not, or would not. He rose. Which for Wolfe meant this had moved from theory to resolution. Archie, call Miss Zhao. Invite her here. Do not alarm her. Say we are completing the timeline. Offer a stipend for her time. I called, and she accepted. Said she could be there by 4. When the doorbell rang at 3:58, I knew this would be it. She entered calm, polished, in a muted grey sweater and slacks, as if arriving for a second interview. She sat in the red chair across from Wolfe, her hands folded neatly, her gaze steady. Miss Zhao, Wolfe said. Thank you for coming. Of course. I'll be brief. We know that someone ordered the fatal cake using a public kiosk and an anonymous card. We know the order was traced to you, visually, if not conclusively. She blinked once. You can't prove that. No, Wolfe said. But I don't need to. I only need to show you had reason. You knew of the affair. You knew Clara was going to cut you loose. Perhaps not today, perhaps not this month, but soon. You were too competent, too composed. You frightened her. Clara, seated off to the side, made a sound, but Wolfe held up a finger. You baked the cake. You ensured Penny made the frosting, keeping your hands clean. You made sure Clara was away that day, and you arranged for the poison not to kill Clara directly, but to unnerve her, ruin her, make her the centerpiece of scandal and whispers. It was elegant, and cowardly. Dominique didn't flinch, but she didn't deny it, either. You calculated. Wolfe said that Clara would run, that her brand would collapse under the weight of a poisoned product, and that you could step in, either publicly or quietly, as the one who survived it. But you miscalculated 2 things. Her lips moved. What? Wolfe leaned forward. First, that Clara would seek help, and second, that I would care. Dominique's eyes flicked to me, then to Clara. She stood abruptly. I want a lawyer. Of course, Wolfe said smoothly. You'll need one. She turned silent and walked out, but not fast, not frantic, just finished. When the door closed behind her, Clara sank into her seat like someone deflating. She was so calm, she murmured. Precisely, Wolfe said. He stood, slowly, satisfied. Come, Archie. Dinner. And just like that, the frosting cracked, and the truth came clean. Dinner that night was trout poached in white wine with parsley butter, followed by a bitter leaf salad, and one of Fritz's less talkative soufflés. Wolfe, never a man to gloat aloud, remained unusually contemplative between bites, occasionally glancing toward the orchid room as if checking whether justice had disturbed the temperature in there too. Clara Venner, still seated at the table, like she wasn't quite sure how she'd gotten there, hadn't touched her plate. Fritz raised an eyebrow once, but Wolfe waved him off. "She is digesting relief," he said. "It takes longer than food." When dinner ended, Wolfe retired to the office with his cognac, and I followed, leaving Clara to finally pick at her soufflé in silence. We settled in, him in his throne, me with a glass of brandy on the edge of my desk, and watched the rain start to slide down the windows like it had nowhere better to be. "She didn't confess," I said. "No," Wolfe said. "She withheld as I expected. You think she's going to deny it until the end. I think she knows she's already lost. The rest is posturing. People cling to denial like it's a last coat in winter, but she will be formally arrested soon enough. Saul has already notified the district attorney. The photographic evidence, though circumstantial, is compelling when paired with motive means and the increasingly public threats against Miss Venner." I nodded, swirling the brandy. "Still feels like something's missing." "Indeed," Wolfe said, tapping his fingers together. "That is why you will visit Mrs. Trevis again tomorrow." That took me by surprise. "Audrey, you think she's involved?" "No," Wolfe said. "But she has more to say. People always do when they think the storm has passed." The next morning, I made my way back to Sutton Place. Audrey Trevis opened the door wearing the same black blouse from the previous visit, but her eyes were alert this time, sharper. The morning veil had lifted, and I suspected that whatever replaced it wasn't going to be sweet. "You again," she said. "Me again," I said. "Mind if I ask a few more questions?" She stepped aside without a word, which I took as permission. I waited until we were seated in her icebox of a living room, before laying it out. "We have strong reason to believe the cake that killed your husband was ordered by Dominique Chau." She didn't blink. "The assistant?" "Yes. We believe she intended to sabotage Clara Venner, not your husband, but he ate the cake first." Her expression barely shifted. "Then Austin died for nothing." "That's one way to put it. But there's a part I don't understand." She waited. "Why didn't you tell me about the affair?" Her smile was a fraction too tight. "Because I wanted you to ask me. I wanted you to know something was off. You knew about Clara." "Not for certain. But I knew Austin was pulling away. I had access to his emails. I saw the late-night payments, the meetings. He wasn't careful. Or maybe he wanted to be caught." "You think he loved her?" "I think he needed her. There's a difference." I nodded. "When you said the cake wasn't meant for him, you believed it." "I did. And I do. Austin had enemies, but none that would have baked them into a cake. Clara's made her share of messes." I leaned forward. "You didn't send the cake. But you suspected Clara had crossed someone." She didn't answer directly. I wanted her to feel the pressure. That's why I said what I said. Because if she was involved, she'd panic. And if she wasn't, someone else would. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. Audrey Trevis might not have baked cyanide into a cake, but she knew how to stoke the oven. I left with no hard evidence, but a sense that justice, if not legal, then poetic, had come full circle. Trevis had died by a message meant for someone else, and Audrey had answered by lighting a few matches herself. No law against that. Yet, back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my account with a minimum of grunts and 2 raised eyebrows, high praise by his standards. "She knew," I said, "and she let the danger escalate. Maybe she even welcomed it." "Not uncommon," Wolfe said. "People who feel powerless often seize the only lever left to them." Implication. "She's not guilty." "No. But she is not innocent either." He swirled his beer. "We exist in the grey. Always have." The doorbell rang, and I went to answer. This time it wasn't a client, or a cop, or a suspect. It was Penny Lerner. She looked different, hair pulled back, no lipstick, eyes wary but determined. "I heard," she said. "About Dominique. About everything." I let her in. She stepped into the office like someone entering a cathedral that had once expelled her. "I came to ask," she said. "What happens to the bakery now?" Wolfe didn't look up.
That is not my concern. But it's mine, she said. Clara's not the same. She's shaken. Dominique was her foundation, even if she didn't see it. Without her, the whole place might collapse. Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. Then you have your answer. If Miss Venner's success required a sociopath beneath her, it was already doomed. She flinched. I didn't mean it like that, she said. I want to help. Wolfe leaned back. Then do. Work. Protect. And remind her that sweetness alone doesn't build empires. Penny nodded once and left without further drama. As the door closed, Wolfe grunted and shifted his bulk. I have no patience for idealism in commerce, he said. I grinned. Even when it comes with frosting. Especially then. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the city muffled by thick glass and thick skin. Outside, the bakery would recover or fall, reputations would mend or rot, and someone in a holding cell would stare at white walls and dream of control they no longer had. Inside, the brownstone exhaled. Peace at least until the next doorbell rang. The next 2 days passed in something that could almost be called quiet, by our standards. Clara Venner returned to her bakery under discreet watch. Saul arranged for Dominique Chau's arrest through the DA's office with enough evidence to make resistance theatrical but futile. And Wolfe, having chewed the case down to its philosophical rind, returned to his orchids with a vengeance. He only came downstairs for meals, and the occasional acid-laced comment about the modern decline in moral fiber and frosting standards. On the 3rd day, a delivery arrived addressed to Wolfe himself, a rare occurrence. I signed for the slim cream-colored envelope and brought it to him in the office, where he was seated with The World of Orchids open across his lap and a large bottle of Belgian beer on the stand next to him. He squinted at the handwriting. Female, mid-30s, confident. Not Clara. Should I step back? I asked. Perhaps. He slit the envelope with a gold-handled letter opener shaped like a miniature scimitar, one of his more flamboyant possessions, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He read silently. Then again. Then slowly refolded the page and set it beside his glass. Well, I prompted. It's from Audrey Trevis. What does she want? She offers thanks for my part in clarifying the narrative. Her phrase, not mine. And she expresses hope that justice is a dish best served cold. That sounds theatrical. Yes, Wolfe muttered. But it also confirms something I suspected. He tapped the arm of his chair. She knew. Not just about the affair, but about Dominique's intentions. Perhaps not in detail, but enough. She let it play out. She wanted Clara to burn. But Dominique went further than she'd intended. Undoubtedly. I suspect Mrs. Trevis underestimated the scope of vengeance when left to someone else's hands. I frowned. You think Audrey's clean? In the legal sense, yes. But in the moral sense? He gave a short snort. No more than a man who oils the blade but lets another make the cut. I sat down and poured myself a glass of seltzer. What now? Now we finish the matter. You mean the aftermath? Yes. He paused. Call Miss Venner. Invite her here this afternoon. Alone. There remains something to resolve. Clara arrived at 3:30, this time dressed less like a boutique commander, and more like someone who'd finally stopped bracing for impact. Her hair was pulled back, her jacket soft grey cashmere, and there was no lipstick, just bare honesty. That alone was telling. She stepped into the office and sat without needing to be asked. I suppose you've read the paper, she said. Yes, Wolfe replied. But I am not interested in the Post's version of events. She folded her hands. Then what do you want, Mr. Wolfe? To offer you clarity, and perhaps discomfort. But clarity first. She nodded. You were targeted, Wolfe said. Because you built your success on precision, consistency, and the myth of control. But you neglected one thing, how that control landed on those beneath you. I ran a tight kitchen, she said. That's not a crime. No, Wolfe said. But it breeds silence. And silence is the soil where betrayal takes root. Clara blinked. You think I caused it? I think you cultivated it. Miss Yao didn't simply hate you, she felt invisible. Penny suspected. Alton Peary saw shadows. Even your clients, Mrs. Trevis among them, felt the tremors of a carefully buried fault line. And when something cracked, no one warned you. They watched. Clara said nothing for a long moment. Then so what do I do with that? Change, Wolfe said simply. Or perish. Not from poison, but from rot. Your bakery can survive a scandal, but not a rot at its root. She looked down at her hands. Dominique was the best person I had. No, Wolfe said. She was the most efficient. There is a difference. She stood slowly, adjusting her sleeve. Thank you, she said. For more than the answer. Wolfe nodded. A rare gesture of civility. Miss Venner, I do not offer counsel lightly. But I suggest you find a new pastry chef with a loud voice and no reverence for hierarchy. Her mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. You may have saved more than my business. She left without another word. I waited a beat before speaking. You really think she'll change? She will try, Wolfe said. That is all one can demand. I poured more seltzer. You're getting soft. Nonsense, he grumbled. I'm full. It's not the same. I grinned. So this case goes in the books as solved. Barely, he said. No murder was intended, no confession obtained, and no neat lines drawn. But justice happened. Justice, he said, arrived in a tart shell, misshapen, but sufficient. He raised his glass. To imperfection. I clinked mine. And to frosting. May it never be weaponized again. Later that evening, with the rain tapering off and the brownstone swaddled in stillness, Fritz served a new dessert. Almond sponge with marzipan cream. Wolfe, after his third bite, looked momentarily pleased. That, he said, tastes like closure. And I figured that, in our line of work, that was as close as you got. The next morning, Wolfe made an unusual declaration over breakfast. I require a reprieve. That in itself was not shocking. Wolfe often claimed the world exhausted him. But this time he meant a full 48 hours of zero interruptions. No phone calls, no clients, no mysteries, just orchids, books and food. Fritz approved of this wholeheartedly. I less so. You take a vacation every third week, I said, pushing aside a plate of eggs I hadn't asked for. What's this really about? Wolfe dabbed his lips. The last case was untidy. Psychological manipulation, personal betrayal, morally ambiguous actors. It offends my sense of proportion. And the trout soufflé last night didn't. He grunted. But he meant it. He was disturbed, not by the crime itself, but by the parts he couldn't polish. Dominique Zhao hadn't confessed. Audrey Trevis hadn't lied, but hadn't been clean either. Clara Venner had survived, but the damage lingered like smoke in the walls. And Wolfe hated smoke. So I agreed to the reprieve, up to a point. I spent the morning catching up on correspondence, checking in with Saul, and listening to Lon Cohen at the Gazette swear that the full story hadn't hit the press yet, but was being teased out by one of the junior reporters like a terrier in a meat locker. They want to paint Clara as the Ice Queen, Lon said. Dominique as the loyal soldier who snapped. They're not wrong, I said. No, but they're not right either. Which was the story of the whole case, really. Around 3 o'clock, I took a walk, part habit, part hope that nothing resembling murder would appear along my route. I ended up at a newsstand, where the headlines were mercifully about politics and baseball. I bought a pack of gum, a paper I didn't need, and started back to the brownstone. Halfway there, my phone rang. I considered ignoring it, honoring Wolfe's imposed ceasefire, but habit dies harder than idealism. It was Penny Lerner. Mr. Goodwin, she said quickly. I wouldn't call unless look, Clara's gone. I stopped walking. Gone where? She left the bakery this morning, and never came back. She was supposed to meet a client at noon. Never showed. Her phone's off. I called her apartment. No answer. Could she just be taking a day? No. She had a full schedule, and she didn't cancel anything. I've worked with her long enough to know. She doesn't vanish. Anyone see her leave? No. But the last thing she said, before going out, was that she was meeting someone who owed her a truth. I thought she meant a supplier. Now I'm not so sure. I hung up and jogged the rest of the way back to the brownstone. Wolfe, unsurprisingly, was in the plant room. I called up to him, breaking the truce. "You'll want to hear this." There was a long pause, then the faint thump of slippered feet, descending the stairs. When Wolfe appeared in the office, he was wearing the expression of a man being dragged to an amateur theatre production. "Miss Venner has disappeared," I said. "She left the bakery to meet someone. Told Penny it was someone who owed her a truth. That was hours ago. No calls, no sightings. Her phone's dead." Wolfe sank into his chair. "Did she tell anyone else?" "No. And Penny's scared enough to break protocol." "Bah," he muttered. "Why must people seek closure like they seek candy, always expecting sweetness? I'll go check her apartment." "Take Saul," Wolfe said. "I want him at the bakery in case the contact resurfaces. You to the residence. Be thorough." He closed his eyes again. "And Archie, if you find a body, I shall be extremely annoyed." Clara's apartment was in a converted brownstone on East 78th. Sleek, efficient, cold. I had to convince the doorman I was there on professional business and had an emergency reason to enter. It helped that Fritz had made brownies that morning, and I'd brought one as a bribe. Inside, the apartment was in order. No signs of struggle. No note. No misplaced items. Her handbag wasn't there, but her coat was, which was odd. The security system hadn't been activated.
Then I found something. A scrap of paper under the couch. Half a handwritten name. Tun Peary. That was enough to send me calling. Alton Peary didn't answer his door. His building in Queens had a broken buzzer and a landlord who didn't believe in repairs. I climbed the 3 flights and knocked. Hard. No answer. I checked the doorknob. Unlocked. "Miss Venner," I called in. Nothing. I entered cautiously. The apartment reeked of unwashed dishes, cheap air freshener, and fried food. The shades were drawn. The living room was a mess of stacked cookware, open notebooks, and dust-covered appliances. And in the corner, on a battered chair that had seen better decades, sat Clara, alive, breathing, looking at me like I'd caught her cheating at solitaire. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said. "I came to talk to Alton." "Where is he?" "Gone. He left before I arrived. The neighbor said he moved out this morning. Said he was headed to Chicago." I raised a brow. "You didn't think to call someone?" "I needed answers," she said. "I thought he might have known what Dominique was planning." "Why him?" "Because he hated me, and he wasn't subtle about it. And Dominique didn't act alone. Not entirely. Someone whispered to her." "And did you find out anything?" She hesitated. "Only that I need to rethink how I've treated people." "That's not a satisfying answer, but it's what I've got." I nodded. "Let's get you home. Wolfe was about to revoke your bakery privileges." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened, sighed deeply, and poured himself a double beer. "Miss Venner," he said, "you must understand, ghosts remain. Dominique is in custody, but trust once lost does not return on cue. You will spend years earning back the benefit of the doubt. If that bothers you, close your shop. If it doesn't start tomorrow." She nodded quietly. Then, in an unexpected gesture, she turned to me. "Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I mean that." I gave her a smile. "I'll take payment in cake, not compliments." Wolfe scowled. "He will do no such thing." But as she left, I saw something strange in Wolfe's face. Not warmth, exactly, but something close to hope. The kind you'd almost believe in, if you hadn't seen what people could do with frosting and a grudge. The next day began with Fritz presenting us with a lemon poppy seed loaf that he claimed would restore balance to the universe. Wolfe, still recovering from the affront of Clara Venner's disappearance and reappearance, took one bite and muttered, "Sufficient." That was Fritz's equivalent of a standing ovation. I was halfway through my second slice when the doorbell rang. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up. "Of course," I replied, brushing off crumbs. "Heaven forbid you interrupt the journey of a citrus rind." At the door stood Saul Panzer, trench coat folded over one arm, face as impassive as a parking meter. "You'd better see this," he said. I stepped aside, let him in, and led him to the office. Wolfe, mildly displeased at the early intrusion, but not entirely surprised. It was Saul. Put down his fork and gestured toward the red leather chair. Saul sat, reached into his coat, and produced a folder. "Got a call last night," he said, "from a private investigator across the river. He'd been hired by someone to dig into Clara Venner. He didn't know who the client was. He was paid in cash, contacted through burner numbers, all very cloak and dagger. He got spooked when the Trevis cake hit the news." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Go on." "The PI didn't find much, but what he did find is in here." I opened the folder. Inside were a few grainy black and white photos, and a stack of notes. The photos showed Clara at various locations, entering her bakery, leaving her apartment, walking near the Lexington subway entrance, all dated 6 months ago. "Surveillance," I muttered. "Why didn't we see this before?" "Because it was never meant to be used," Saul said. "It was leverage, or maybe insurance." "Insurance against what?" Wolfe asked. "That," Saul said, "is the twist." The investigator recognized one of the people tailing Clara, another freelancer, named Desmond Lyle, ex-security contractor, rough type. The PI thought he was working freelance for Audrey Trevis. Wolfe's eyes opened. "Audrey, that's the implication," Saul said. "She may not have ordered the cake, but she had someone watching Clara months before the poisoning. Possibly out of suspicion about the affair, or maybe something more." Wolfe sat very still for a moment, fingers steepled. Then he nodded, once, almost to himself. "This," he said, "is the second current." I looked up from the notes. Meaning, Dominique Zhao was the primary actor, the overt current. But she wasn't acting in a vacuum. Audrey Trevis suspected, and instead of confronting her husband, or Miss Venner, she chose subterfuge. She set something in motion. Saul leaned forward. "You think she nudged Dominique?" "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that Mrs. Trevis either suspected the affair, and voiced her suspicions in the right ears, or left enough breadcrumbs for someone else to pick up. A woman in her position, intelligent and bitter, might not light the match, but she'd leave a trail of kindling." "Legally," I said, "she's still clean." "Legally," Wolfe agreed. "But this confirms what we already intuited. There were no innocents here. Not even Clara." Wolfe snorted. "Especially not Clara. Her blindness to the motivations of those around her was not just professional, it was willful. She believed competence was loyalty, and that efficiency was affection. Classic mistake," Saul said. "Indeed." Wolfe rose, which meant the discussion was about to end. "You've done well, Saul. Leave the folder. I shall examine it in detail." Saul nodded and stood. "Anything else?" "Only this. Avoid private investigators who accept cash from anonymous clients. It complicates things." After he left, I turned to Wolfe. "So Audrey started it. Dominique finished it. Clara paid for it, and we cleaned it up." "Correct," Wolfe said. "That feels unsatisfying." "It should," he said. "Real crimes often are." He walked slowly toward the window, hands behind his back. "Do you recall the orchid I showed you last month? The Paphiopedilum villosum, the one with the weird lip?" Weird is insufficiently descriptive. It is grotesque. Its structure is asymmetrical. Its color is vulgar. And yet in the wild, it survives where others do not. I nodded. "Okay, this case," Wolfe said, "is a Paphiopedilum villosum. It lacks grace, it offends, and yet it is complete." I blinked. "You're saying the ugliness was necessary?" "No," he said. "I'm saying it was inevitable." Later that afternoon, Clara Venner called. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "If it had been Audrey, if she had placed the order herself, would you have pursued her just as strongly?" "You want honesty." "Yes." "Then yes." Wolfe doesn't care about politics, or elegance, or sympathy. He cares about truth. There was a pause. Then she said, "Thank you," and hung up. That evening Wolfe refused to speak during dinner. I chalked it up to introspection, but I suspected it was something else. A kind of weariness that only comes after staring too long into human motivation. When Fritz brought out dessert, an apricot tart with crème fraîche, Wolfe studied it carefully, before lifting his fork. "It is strange," he said, "how much can hide beneath something sweet." I nodded. "You could say the same about people." He took a bite. "And yet," he said, swallowing, "we go on eating." It wasn't a statement of hope,
or doom, just fact. And as far as Wolfe was concerned, that was enough. 3 days after the tart and the philosophical digestion that followed, we were back in what Wolfe refers to as the proper rhythm of the house. That means breakfast at 8, orchids from 9 to 11, no interruptions during lunch, unless a bomb goes off on 35th Street, and no business allowed that can't be handled in a single sentence or a single glance. I was halfway through dictating a summary of the Venner case to a fresh file. Wolfe insists on having a complete typed narrative on every case, no matter how unpalatable, when the doorbell rang. I checked my watch. 11:45. Archie, Wolfe said from behind the dictionary-sized edition of the Orchid Grower's Almanac. If that is a client, turn them into a ghost. I went to the door and opened it. It wasn't a client. It was Audrey Trevis. She looked different, lighter, not emotionally, but physically. Her makeup had been dialed back, her posture less posed. There was a looseness to her coat, a tiredness to her eyes, but not fragility. She looked like someone who'd walked into her own storm and come out the other side, still damp but upright. Mrs. Trevis, I said, I wasn't expecting you. Few people do expect me, she said, voice dry. May I come in? I hesitated. Mr. Wolfe doesn't usually take visitors unannounced, I said. I won't take long. That was never true, but I stepped aside and led her into the office. Wolfe glanced up, took her in, and scowled slightly, though not with the full disapproval he reserves for reporters or IRS auditors. Mrs. Trevis, he said, you are not here by accident. She sat, folded her coat over her lap, and stared directly at him. No, I'm here to finish something, or maybe to confess. Wolfe put down the almanac. That alone was signal enough. You knew, he said simply. I did. You encouraged. I was angry, she said. That's not the same thing. You left doors open, Wolfe said, and Dominique walked through. I didn't tell her to do it, she said, more to herself than to him. But I knew something was building. I could feel it. Every time I watched Clara's bakery climb in reputation, while she stopped, looked away. I had everything, on paper, the apartment, the marriage, the name. But she had the control. People respected her, admired her. I could never get that. You had your husband, Wolfe said, and then you lost him. No, she said softly. He was already gone. The cake just made it official. Wolfe was silent for a moment, and now, she looked at me, then back at Wolfe. I'm leaving the city, selling the apartment. I just wanted to say, if Dominique had gone further, if Clara had died, I would have blamed myself, because I know I helped make it possible, and that doesn't go away. Wolfe nodded once. Responsibility rarely does. She stood. I thought you should know. That, Wolfe said, was not necessary, but not unappreciated. She left without another word. I saw her out, watched her cross the street slowly, with no clear destination, and disappear into a taxi that pulled up without being hailed, like it had been waiting. When I returned to the office, Wolfe had resumed reading. I sat down and waited. Finally, I asked, do you believe her? He looked over the book. That she feels remorse. Yes. That she regrets her part in it. Certainly. That she would act differently given another chance. I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. Perhaps. But history suggests otherwise. By the end of the week, Venner's confectionery had reopened. Clara was back in the kitchen, not as a full-time baker, but in what she described to me on the phone as a supervisory role with less tyranny and more temperature control. Penny Lerner had been promoted. Dominique Zhao, pending trial, was being held at Rikers with minimal comment. The DA's office, according to Saul, was weighing its options. No jury's gonna love that cake as a murder weapon, Saul said, but they'll hate the intent. She'll get time. Wolfe declined to attend the hearing, citing boredom and pastry fatigue. I typed the final page of the case file, labeled it the Venner matter, and filed it in the cabinet under Vir, just after the Velvet Chicken swindle, and just before the Vindaloo deception, neither of which I recommend reading before lunch. Later that afternoon, Fritz brought in a slice of dark chocolate mousse cake, unprompted. From the bakery, he said. Miss Venner sent it. Wolfe peered at it like it might explode. Should we test it for strychnine? I offered. Don't be absurd, he muttered. It would be beneath her now. Still, he let me take the first bite. It was flawless. After a moment, Wolfe took his fork and sampled it. He chewed slowly, deliberately. Then, with a mild sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "She has improved," he said. "In flavor, or judgment, in restraint." He ate another bite. "But I will not rely on it," I grinned. "So ends another chapter." "No," Wolfe said. "That chapter ended days ago. This is merely the epilogue." I leaned back, stretching. "Any thoughts on what we should do if she sends more?" He closed his eyes. "Eat carefully." And so we did. With every bite, a reminder that even the sweetest things, frosting, cake, love, can hide bitterness inside. But also, sometimes, redemption. Just enough to go on. It was nearly a week after Clara's reopening, when the final knot came undone, not with fanfare, but with a sealed envelope delivered by certified mail. I opened it on the hall table, expecting a late payment notice, or a belated invitation to a wedding Wolfe would flatly ignore. Instead, it was a formal confession, typed, unsigned, postmarked from a small town in western Pennsylvania. 4 pages, clean grammar, unemotional tone, the kind of document written not in panic, but in resignation. The writer was Dominique Zhao. She detailed it all, how she'd overheard Audrey Trevis arguing with her husband outside the bakery one afternoon, and pieced together the affair long before Clara realized she'd been found out. How Audrey, smart and quietly vengeful, had confided to Dominique without ever saying the words. How she had dropped breadcrumbs. Clara is ruthless. Clara always wins. People like her always land on their feet, and how Dominique had picked them up. She wrote of feeling invisible, of watching her work taken for granted, while Clara was profiled in food blogs and called a genius. How Penny got praised for frosting swirls Dominique had taught her. How customers smiled at Clara, and forgot who actually stood behind the counter at 6 a.m. with cracked hands and aching feet. She didn't blame Audrey directly, but she thanked her for the nudge. "I might never have acted," the letter said, "if someone hadn't told me I was right to feel betrayed. If someone hadn't lit the fuse." And so she had waited for the perfect storm. Clara absent, Penny preoccupied, the cake a high-profile order under Clara's name. A single dose, a frosting that wouldn't look or taste any different. A message. Only Trevis had eaten it first. She wrote that she hadn't intended to kill anyone, but admitted that, when it happened, she hadn't felt regret. Just confirmation, a twisted kind of proof. "I wanted Clara to be afraid," she wrote, "to lose control, the way the rest of us lived every day." She ended the letter with a single sentence that Wolfe read aloud twice. "I poisoned the frosting because no one ever tasted the bitterness until it hit their own tongue." We sat in the office in silence for a while after that. Wolfe had closed the letter, weighed it in his hand like something too fragile to shelve and too heavy to burn. "It changes nothing," he said, "but it confirms everything," I replied. He gave me a look. "I require no confirmation, Archie." "No, but you enjoy it." He didn't argue. We handed the letter over to the DA that afternoon. It wouldn't affect the charges. Dominique was already awaiting trial, but it would ensure clarity, and maybe some leverage for sentencing. Either way, it ended the speculation. Audrey Trevis's involvement, subtle, indirect, unprovable, would never be called to account. A week later, the bakery held a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony. Clara invited us, of course. Wolfe declined, of course. I went. It was smaller than I expected. No cameras, no press, just some returning customers, 3 new assistants, and Penny Lerner managing the counter like she'd been doing it since birth. Clara stood beside a modest cake. Vanilla sponge, no flashy tears, no gilded fruit, and thanked the small crowd without flair. When it was over, I approached her. "You're starting over," I said. "I have to," she replied. "Do you trust the people around you now?" "I do, because now I know to earn it, not assume it." I nodded. "Wolfe says trust isn't owed, it's leased. Then I'll pay in installments." Before I left, Penny handed me a small white box tied with green string. "From all of us," she said. "No frosting this time." Back at the brownstone, I handed it to Wolfe and watched him open it. Inside were 2 small almond cookies, simple, honest. He ate one, slowly. "Well?" I asked. "They are imperfect," he said. I grinned. "That's a compliment now. It is survival." He closed the box and leaned back. This case, he said, was not one of clean lines or simple villains. It was a web made of vanity, resentment, ambition and silence. Too human to wrap up with a bow. Exactly, but sufficiently human to resolve. He lifted his glass of beer and tilted it toward me. To bitterness, he said. I raised my coffee, and the people who taste it too late. The clink was soft, and just like that, the brownstone exhaled again, settling into the space it always returns to, between silence and observation, between comfort and vigilance, where nothing sweet is ever taken at face value. Case closed. Case closed. Case closed.